So thanks very much, Andrew.
Thanks, Ed. So for those of you who don't know me, Andrew Murphy, I work for a company called Pillar Leaders. My background has been quite wide-ranging, started off as a software developer, moved into consultancy, sales, leadership. I've done quite a lot of jobs in quite a few different industries. But the thing which really I found consistent throughout all of my career is that working with other human beings, you can't escape it. And whether it's being a leader, whether it's working in finance, whether it's working as a coach, whether it's working as a trainer, whether it's working as a sales rep, people are an intrinsic part of what we do. So that's why influence to me has always been the cornerstone of a lot of stuff. Now, I want this to be quite an interactive session. So please talk in the chat. Ask me questions in the Q&A at the bottom of the video. There's a button that says Q&A. Please ask questions in there. We'll have some points as well where you can raise your hand and ask questions directly. Please do that. My goal for what we're going to do in the next 40 minutes is to give you something that you can go away and start using tomorrow. And that means sharing things, that means talking about things, and that means really making sure that what we do is applicable to you straight away. Because of that, my one ask of you is, please share, but also please don't walk away from this and share other people's stories. Let's make sure that whatever people share in here stays in here. So the first thing that I'd like to do is I just want to get an idea of why people are here today. What was it about this topic which really engaged you and really made you want to join? So if you got something you want to share, if there's either something in particular in your mind at the moment that you want to talk about, if there's a particular situation you had recently where you wished you were more influential than you actually were, please either put it in the chat or press the raise hand button, and we can unmute you and get you to share it in the room. So if anybody wants to share that now, just give you 30 seconds to think about it. And Ed, if anybody raises their hand, if you could invite them in.
Will indeed, yeah. So there should be a button possibly on the toolbar there for you. When you click it, I can tell that you've raised your hand, and what I can do is allow you to talk, and then you unmute yourself and talk.
Yeah, so just anything in particular that you wanted to get out of the session today, or a situation in which you wished you were more influential than you were.
If you don't want to raise your hand, just do it in the chat window.
If people share, it allows me to customize what I'm talking about. I can try and hit particular topics. I can try and hit things that they're discussing. Okay, so Peter from Auckland has just said in the chat, influencing as one of the most important leadership skills. I totally agree. This is something which I think a lot of people can do to spend more time learning. If you're a leader, most of what you're doing when you progress throughout your career is going to be working with people. It's going to be influencing people, and that's leadership. There's the technology leadership side, but there's the people leadership side, and people leadership becomes more and more important as you progress throughout your career, but it's also the area which a lot of people put less focus on, because it's not the things that come naturally to a lot of people that find themselves into leadership. Okay. Yes, so Brendan, thank you for sharing that. One of the things we put in the topic is that influence is even harder to do remotely. As good as our influence skills are, we've got to spend more time and more effort on doing and doubling down on those skills when we're working remotely, because the way we communicate, we lose so much information and so much data when we're talking remotely. If we're in person, you can see my body language, hear the tone of my voice, you can get a sense of who I am and what I'm doing. When we go remote, we start losing that. When we have video chat, we lose a lot of body language, a lot of the physical posture. When we lose video chat, we're losing body language entirely and facial expressions entirely. And when we want to email and Slack, we're losing tone of voice. So as we step down this list of styles of communication, this hierarchy of communication, from in-person to video chat to phone call to text, we're losing data. We're losing our ability to influence effectively. And we've got to make sure that we're doubling down on that and adding stuff back in. And we're going to talk about the stuff that we can add back in there. Okay, so we have quite a lot of people from Vic today. We've got some New South Wales, some Queensland people, and we've got Peter from New Zealand. Awesome. Right, influence. When we think about influence, we think about trying to get somebody to do something. That's pretty much if you were to open the dictionary definition, but it's also got a lot of these negative connotations to it. When we say influence, a lot of people start thinking about manipulation. They start thinking about, tricking people, and that can be part of it, but it's like any of these skills. It can be used for good or it can be used for ill. And it's up to us as the wielders of these skills to make sure that we're using that judgment and making sure that what we're doing is influencing for the greater good rather than influencing for purely our own personal success. And that's how, especially as leaders, if you're a leader in a team, that's how you get the whole team to succeed rather than focusing on your own personal successes. And we're going to talk more about that. So when we think about influence, we think about how we can get somebody to make a change in their behavior. Ultimately, like, thoughts are important, but really the thing we want to change is people's behavior. And what we're going to talk through today is a model of how we get them to change that behavior. So this could be if we're in a negotiation and we're trying to get somebody to agree to an action, if we're in a performance review with somebody and we're trying to get them to change their behavior or to double down and keep doing behavior that they're doing. This can be if we're sending an email asking for budget. This can be if we're speaking to anybody in our lives and we want to get them to do something. Now, what we find when we're doing influence is that a lot of people focus on one of two areas. They focus on giving people the information and giving them the skills to use that information. And this misses out on a whole host of influencing techniques. We're losing track of what's going on. And I'm going to use a model today that I'm going to talk you through. We've got about 30, 40 minutes to go through this, so I'm going to go through it reasonably quickly. And then we're going to have time for questions and answers at the end. But in the meantime, if you want to ask questions, please put them into the Q&A section. So influence is all about the way the brain processes information. If we think about how we look around the world, we see lots and lots of information around us, lots of data. If I look around me at my desk right now, I can see a glass of water, and the glass of water is full. I can see a coffee cup, and the coffee cup is empty. These are all pieces of information. They exist in the world, and they are objectively true pieces of information. Our brain receives thousands of these a second. We cannot possibly process all of this information. And if you think about it, if you just glance around your room now and just notice something that you just weren't noticing until I asked you to look around your room, there'll be things that are there in your room which are always there, and you never pay them any attention because they've never moved, they've never changed, they're just there. If you notice one of them, please put it in the chat, let me know. I'm looking around now and I can see my camera. My camera is in the corner of the room from where I was charging it, and it must have been there about 2 months, and it's just become the background of my office, and I've just not noticed it. And so information, data, there's just so much to process that our brain cannot possibly process it all. And so the way our brain decides which bits of that information to process and which bits of that information to take on board is what that information means, the meaning of that information. Now, this is where we take the step from objective to subjective. Everything from this point onwards isn't an objective truth. It's how we interpret it. And so if we take, for example, my full glass of water. I could decide that this has two different meanings. It could be that I must be thirsty because I have a glass of water and I haven't drunk that glass of water, and therefore I must be thirsty. That's one potential meaning. The second potential meaning is that I'm not thirsty because the glass of water is full and I'm not drinking it. So the same piece of information could have two different meanings to it. And this is what our brain is doing the whole time we're looking around the world. It's taking in information and it's attributing meaning to it. But that meaning can be different. Now, I'll give you an example of this, and an example on why this is important with influencing skills. There was a team we were working with, a team of salespeople, and the sales manager told me that they were all celebrating a win. They're also celebrating success. They were all in the room, and they were having a party because their sales numbers were the highest they've ever been. Everybody was happy. Everybody was excited, apart from one person. One person in that room was looking depressed, was looking scared. And it was the lead salesperson, the person who had the best numbers. And yet everybody else was happy, excited, and she was looking visibly upset. I do a little bit of a social awareness, a social perception, an empathy test. Just anybody that wants to have a guess why the lead salesperson was visibly upset when all of the numbers were high. The team had smashed it. The team was excelling. Why do you think the lead salesperson was visibly looking upset? Either type it in the chat or put your hand up and we'll bring you on. Just 30 seconds to think about that. Some good suggestions. So we've got David, the numbers we're going to increase, and Raj, much higher target. That's actually a pretty good guess. That's close to the reason. So the real, and when you ask somebody something, that might be the first reason they tell you. But when you dig into it, the reason was actually that she saw this as a threat to her position. She saw it as if everybody else, their numbers had gone up. She was always here and they were always here. Now this one quarter, she'd gone up a little bit, but everybody else had gone up a lot more. And so she saw it as a threat to her position. And this is how the same information can have two fundamentally different meanings to different people. And the message here is, when we don't help craft that meaning, we lose our ability to influence what's going on. We lose our ability to control how somebody thinks about the situation, how they feel about the situation, if we just give the same information to multiple people. So this here is an objective truth. This is where we start ascribing subjective meaning to it. And if all we ever do is give the same information to multiple people in exactly the same way, we're allowing them to decide the meaning for themselves. So how often have we given somebody some information and gone, I don't understand. I told them this, and yet they've done something completely different. Why? I've told them the information. Why haven't they done the thing that I wanted them to do? And it's because we've lost that meaning. We've lost that ability to give them an interpretation that's meaningful to them. So our brain goes on this cycle all the time. We receive information, we ascribe meaning to it, and then we have an emotional reaction to it. What's really important here is the next step, step number 4, logic. Notice how emotion comes before logic. This is really, really, really important. When we ascribe a meaning to something, the emotion flows from that. And it's not logic at this point, is pure emotion. So when this sales lead saw those numbers and interpreted those numbers in a particular way, it led straight to an emotion, fear. The rest of the team saw the same numbers and interpreted them in a different way and got the emotion of happiness and joy and excitement. They'd taken the same information, they'd interpreted it differently, and they got a different emotion from it. The next step is logic. So this is trained skills. This is if you're a software developer, as I used to be, these are your ability to code. If you're in finance, this is your ability to understand ledgers. If you're a leader, these are all those leadership skills, like how to delegate effectively, how to deal with conflict, how to give feedback to people, how to build cultures. These are your learned skills, and they come after that emotion. The reason for that is because our brains, the way they're wired, emotions shortcut logic. They have to. For us to react quickly in situations where we can't process things logically, like life and death situations, emotions have to come in quickly. And so they start to process things much more quickly with an emotional situation than a logical situation. The next step in this model is action. This is what you actually do. So I see some information. My cup is full of water. I ascribe a meaning to that. I must be thirsty. I have an emotional reaction to it, desire for water. I have a logical reaction to it. I understand how to pick the cup up. I understand that water will make me less thirsty. I drink the water. This is the loop that our brain is going on all the time. For every waking second, we're receiving information around us, we're ascribing it meaning, we're having an emotion, we're logically acting on that, and then we're having the outcome from that. When we give people, normally what people default to doing is giving people information, giving them the skills to work with that information, and they forget about this middle bit here. They forget to give people meaning, and they forget to think about what emotions that meaning will give somebody. And this is especially important when we're working remotely, because like I said at the beginning, and I see we've got some new joiners, if you missed it at the beginning, when we move remote, we're losing a lot of that ability to give meaning. We're losing a lot of that ability to control emotion because we're losing information from that communication medium. When we're going into text message, when we're going into Slack, and we're going into phone calls and video chat, we're losing body posture, we're losing facial expression sometimes. And it's important that we remember that so we can add extra information to change the meaning, to change the emotion. So another example of this, and when things can break down. And if anybody, please, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A section. I want to make sure that I'm answering things. I want to make sure that this model makes sense, because we're going to be doing a little bit of processing on that at some point. If there's any of these steps you want clarification on, let me know. Because in a couple of minutes, we're going to do some thinking about these for you particularly. So we've got to make sure that they all make sense to you. So an example of where information could be the problem. Because whenever we're influencing somebody, we're going to be losing influence at one of these steps. If we don't get the action we want, then we're going to be failing at one of these previous steps. And the further up we go, the more systemic the change we can make. So an example of when information might have been the problem is I was working with somebody and their key member of staff was considering leaving. They were considering leaving the organization. And the reason for that is they didn't see potential progression in the organization. They didn't see a place for them in the future. They didn't see promotion abilities. They didn't see the ability for them to progress in their career. What they didn't know is that there was a huge restructure going on. There was a huge change to the way in which people were positioned. And although there wasn't progression currently, in 6 months' time, there was potential progression. And because this person was one of the top performers, the chances of them getting one of those roles was very high. And so the person had seen the information, which is there's no place for me. They'd taken the meaning on board, which was if I want progression, I've got to look elsewhere. And the emotion that they had there was fear. And therefore their logic went, I can find another job. So the manager in this case sat them down and gave them the new information. They said to them in confidence, you know, this isn't public knowledge, but you're one of my best workers, and I trust you to keep this private. There is going to be a restructure in the next 6 months, and I know you're looking at moving onwards and upwards. There will be a place for you with a further progression position. You know, I can't guarantee it, but all the indications are that, you know, this role will be perfect for you, and you will be able to take it on board. So there's now new information that changes the meaning. The new meaning is now I can progress. I can go forward in this organization, which changes the emotion to be excitement of, yes, I can be part of this. I can be part of this change. And so the action there, which is what we wanted, was the person stays with the organization. So whenever we're losing influence, it will be one of these steps. So we've gone through information, the meaning, back to my example with the sales lead. There, it was helping them understand that the increase in sales numbers of everybody else was a good thing for them. It meant they were doing their job well. It meant they were progressing and that they were helping the team around them succeed. They were setting the bar, and everybody else was realizing what was possible. It's like a 3-minute mile. As soon as somebody could do it, everybody could do it. And also helping them see that these are exactly the things that people look for when we're looking at progression and promotion. You know, when you're looking at being promoted, we're not just looking at your individual success, we're looking at how you help the team succeed. And so in this situation, what she was doing, this sales lead, was ideal because that was what they wanted to promote somebody. They wanted to see their influence on the team. And so we've given them a new meaning to the same information. We changed the way their brain interpreted that information, which changed the emotion. Changed the emotion from fear of losing their job or losing their position to excitement of I'm doing the right thing and this might mean that I get promoted. So exactly the same information, we gave them a different meaning to it, which changed their emotion, which changed their actions. So we got a question from Supradeep. In order for influence to work, do you think the structure of roles play a part? How does it map to the model you're showing? So this is a model of how humans work. It doesn't matter if the person you're trying to influence is your boss, your colleague, your peer, somebody in your team, your partner, your parents, your child. This is a model of how humans work. There are ways you can customize and change it and tweak it, and understanding what the dynamics between you and that other person is will help you with this, but this model will apply to everybody. To give you an example of that, if I am trying to influence my boss, then I might change the way that I do that because I know the meaning that they ascribe to particular things will be different to the meaning that my peers might ascribe to different things. You know, if I'm in a meeting and say, for example, I always tend to use sales as an example for these things. And the main reason for that is because sales is like the extreme example of these skills. Just we can use these skills all the time, every day in every way, but sales allows us to talk about it in an extreme manner that we can understand, and then we can look at how that plays back. So for example, if I'm in a sales meeting and I've got the CEO, the CFO, and the CTO in front of me, I'm going to give them different information or the same information crafted in different ways, because I know that their meaning that they want to get from that is going to be different. The CEO is going to want to know how long it's going to take. They're going to want to know what the impact is, what the change to the business is, what the long-term longevity of this is. That's what they're going to want to know. The CFO is going to want to know how much it's going to cost. And they're going to want to know how long it's going to take and what resources we're tying up from other things. The CTO will probably want to know a lot more intricacies and details on exactly how it's going to work, how it's going to fit in with their existing things. They're going to want to know, what the timeline is in terms of what resources they've got to pull off other projects that they're working on. And so the same model can be applied to all three of those scenarios, because all we're doing is we're customizing these with those people in mind. So the information we give them will be different. The meaning that we try and ascribe to it will be different. And also the emotion that we want to get from them will be different. Now, emotion is the third step. Emotion is one of the things that's the trickiest to deal with, because sometimes we have the information, we totally understand what it means, and it just sucks. You're fired. You understand what I meant, you understand what it means, it just sucks. And so influence at this level is quite hard to work with, but this is where empathy comes in, this is where compassion and understanding, and this is where we've got to help somebody. The only way we can influence people at this point is to help them through their emotional battle, to help them understand how to change and work through those emotions and to be resilient to what's going on. This is one of the hardest ones to deal with, but it can also have a huge impact, especially when we're dealing with those tricky, emotionally charged situations, which we're going to be dealing with a lot now. And so if we're going through this and we're realizing that we're losing influence with somebody, we're not seeing the change that we want, have we given them the right information? Have we given them a useful interpretation of that information? Is their emotions correct for the scenario? They're just sucky emotions, they're unproductive emotions, and we've got to help them through it. So step number 4, logic, skills. This is the easiest one. Do they have the skills to do what we want them to do? It's as simple as that. This is, have we, if we're working on a project and we've got somebody that we're working with and we've got a task for them to do, have we given them the information they need? Do they understand what the information needs? Are they in an emotional place to work on it? Do they have the skills to work on it? This one, most people are comfortable with. Send them on a training course, spend some time with them, some coaching, some training, some one-on-ones, helping them understand what they need to do and how they need to go about doing it. So the last one, and I want you guys to start thinking at the moment about which one of these you tend to forget about the most. If you have an example, please share it. There's going to be a poll popping up in a second, which Ed will do in a couple of minutes, which will talk about this. So have a think about these steps so far. Information, meaning, emotion, logic, and action. There's a time, while you guys are thinking about which one of these steps you forget the most, there's a time when action is actually the one we forget, and this is feedback. Sometimes when we're giving people feedback, we forget to tell them what the outcome of their actions were. If somebody is doing something and they're understanding it, they're working on it, but what they're doing actually isn't resulting in the right thing, that's when step 5 is failing. That's when we're really forgetting to tell them about the feedback of their actions, where we're forgetting to tell them, this is the thing you did, and this is the result of the thing you did. And feeding that back into that information in the first step, because this is a big loop. And if we don't take the action and send it up to the information at the top, then that's when we forget about it. So you guys should have had to think about which of the steps you forget the most and press submit. And then we can get those results up if we can, Ed. Yeah, this is really common. This tends to be the case, especially I don't know how many people tend to work in technical spheres. Based on this audience, we probably have quite a high percentage of people who work in tech, but this is very, very common. That second step, that meaning step, is what most people forget. I've given them the information. They're not doing what I expect them to do. And it's because we've not crafted that information to mean the right thing to them. Or we've crafted the meaning and we've not thought about the emotion that it elicits and then how we deal with that emotion. I'd love to talk about a particular scenario. If you guys want to spend a couple of minutes, think about a situation in the past where you didn't have the right influence that you hoped. And I want you just to have a think about the step which you think you forgot about in that situation. Which step, 1 through 5? Just write it down somewhere. Write down the situation and write down the step which you think you forgot. And I'm just going to give you 2 minutes to do that. You can all watch me drink my glass of water for 2 minutes. If you're unsure, we can have a conversation if you just put your hand up. So just have a think about which step you think you failed on. If you're unsure, just raise your hand and we can have a conversation that can maybe help you see which step you are failing on. 30 more seconds. Okay. Now have a think about if you were to go back into this situation again, how you would change the way you would go about that. So if the step you thought you failed on was step 2, the meaning, how could you change the way you gave that information to the person? How could you change the way you crafted that message to change the meaning that underlies what's going into that? If the reason was logic, then what skills could you have trained them to give them what they need? And if it's emotion, what emotion do you think they were feeling and how could you have helped them with that? To give you an example, I was working with some people at Aussie Post, and one of their guys was showed me an email that they'd sent to somebody else in another team. And effectively, they were a software developer speaking to the hardware folks, the hardware network guys. And they were asking them, they were basically saying, I think the problem is at your side, and I'm not going to do anything because I think the problem's at your side. Now, what meaning does that give if you say something like that? It gives the meaning that, you know, that I'm being uncooperative and I'm not helping. I just want you to fix the problem because I think the problem's at your side. And that emotion that comes from that is going to be anger and frustration and a little bit of disdain. So I helped them recraft that email, which then said, we both want this to work, and I've exhausted all of my ability to work out what's going on. Can you please help me understand what's happening? So we've now completely changed the meaning from this to I'm being stubborn and I want you to solve my problem for me, to I'm a human that needs help and I think you can help me, which drastically changes the emotional reaction to that email from anger and frustration to a desire to help. So that's an example of how we can change the meaning of something, which seems to be the thing that most people, 50% of people think that they forget about the most. So I'll just give you another 2 minutes. Have a think about the situation previously, the step which you think you forgot, and then if you were in that situation again, how you could change the way you were doing it. So we're just having to think about which step we failed on and what we could have done if we did it again. I would love if somebody would be willing to share their situation after this. So if anybody wants to share, if you could put your hand up so that after the next 40, 50 seconds or so, somebody can come on and share what they would do differently in that situation if they were in. Just another 30 seconds to keep thinking about how we would change the situation if we were back.
So someone put
Okay.
their hand up there and then promptly put it down again. But I didn't see who it was.
Does that person want to put their hand up again? Have a think about it. If you want to share, if you want to put it in the chat, put your story in the chat. If you want to put your hand up and share while people are probably typing. Anthony has just said, network guys are accustomed to software guys blaming the network. Yes, and this is really where we can think about, what information are they likely to have already, and what's their default interpretation of any new information. So if we know that most of the time the meaning that network guys ascribe to communications with software guys is that they blame the network, then we've got to make sure that when we're doing a communication, we're trying to be influential, that we take that meaning into account and try and change it. Try and think about how we can write our email, how we can change the way we talk to them on the phone, how we can change that conversation we're having, knowing the meaning they're likely to have and thinking about how we can change that meaning so that we can change the emotion and we can change the logic and we can change the action. So knowing that default situation is really important to knowing how we can change that to where we want it to be more effective to what we want to get out of it. So thank you for sharing that, Anthony. Does anybody want to share their story? If not, I'll have to share one of mine, and I've been sharing a lot of stories. Okay, I'm gonna share my story, Ed. If somebody pops their hand up, just interrupt me and we'll bring them on.
Sure. If you're being put off that this is on Facebook, we can switch that off, and I can also edit it out of the video later, which I'm going to put on YouTube. So
yeah, like I said in the beginning, what we really want to do with these sessions is to give you something you can use tomorrow. So if we can share something which is actually happening, and we can talk about it, and we can help you change that, then that's my job done for this session today. And anything that gets shared in this, if you don't want it to come out to be in the recording at the end, then you can, we can take it out of that.
Yeah, at any point I can. I switched off Facebook Live now. At any point I can pause the recording as well. So. There's something that's come up in the chat.
Yeah, so Brendan said, from time to time, I'm challenged by team members not acting with appropriate level of focus and urgency, even though they know what we are working on is important and time critical. So in this situation, we've got to ask ourselves, which step is the one that we're forgetting to put as much focus on? This is likely to be a step 2. And I know at the end of your message, you said they know what we're working on is important and time critical. That's a statement of information. They know it, but does it have the meaning that's important to them? So with it being important and time critical, is anything in what's happening with them going to be bad if it doesn't happen? From their scenario, oh, so Brendan's just correcting with should know. Yeah, exactly. They should know this. And if that's the case, then maybe the first step is doing information audit and to say, do they actually know this? That's the first step. Do they know it's important and time critical? If they don't, then the answer is simple, to make sure you tell them. But if they do know and they're still not having the behavior that you'd expect, then it's probably important to think about what that means to them, what the meaning of that information is. So if this project fails, what does that failure mean to them? There's probably something in there in which the success or the failure of this project has a direct impact on them. It could be as simple as, it shows up in their KPIs, it shows up in their performance reviews. It could be as simple as that. It could be something like, if they work on this and they get it done and out of the door, they can work on something else that's more fun. Could be as simple as that. But how does the success or the failure of this project impact on them? What do they want to get out of it, out of this project? What do they want to get out of it afterwards? And how can you change the way that you're talking about it to give them a different meaning to what's going on? Let me know, Brendan, if that helps. If it doesn't, then we can talk about it a little bit more. We got one from somebody else who they were unable to influence their boss because the role definition only allowed coaching to teams and not him. This was made explicit during the style of engagement. So this is about influencing up. Influencing up is the same set of skills, but you're absolutely right in that it's harder if we're influencing up, because the people above us are generally better at this than we are. And so it makes our challenge more difficult. If we just bear in mind the fact that, it is the same, their brains will work in the same way. We've just got to work out how we can use this model to be most effective for them. So again, what do they want which step, when you're trying to encourage your boss to do something, which step do you think is the one you need to work on? If you want to share a little bit more information, we can maybe work out, if you, a particular example, we can maybe work out which step it is. But I would just encourage going through the model and trying to work out which step you need to focus on. So we've got another comment. Being a new product owner to an existing delivery team, you feel like an outsider sometimes. The team is closed. Lead seems protective. It's hard to influence the delivery leads, also being a new team member. Yeah, this is really, really common. So coming into a new team, there's a lot of emotions, there's a lot of internal narrative, a lot of meaning that's going on in these things. And so I would really encourage taking a breath and trying to think about, what's your meaning for the situation? What information are you seeing? What's your interpretation of that information? And what's your emotional reaction to that? First step. Second step, going through the people in the team that are the influencers in the team and asking them the same question. What do they think about the team? What's their understanding of what's going on with their team? And what's their potential understanding, the potential meaning that they're ascribing to you as a new person joining? How much do they know about you? How much do they know about the person who was previously in your position, and that they're carrying through that meaning and that emotion to you? It's really hard to get people to share this. Really hard to get them to share what information really, really, really means to them, because it can be quite personal and quite deep to get people to do that. If you have a really high trusting relationship with somebody, which in this situation doesn't seem like you do, you can ask. But if you don't have that trust, then there are questions you can ask that help give you information, that help shape your meaning of what's going on with them. So I'd encourage, if you're not particularly understanding why they're closed off and why they're being protective, try to think about potential theories as to why that's the case. And then think about the questions you could ask that would prove or disprove that theory. Taking a scientific approach to this, having a hypothesis, thinking of ways we could test this hypothesis, and then trying to get new data to feed back into that hypothesis to try and help us understand what the meaning to them could be. So that would be my advice there. I hope that helps. If it doesn't, let me know and we can go into it a bit deeper. We just had a share. I had a tough time building trust with somebody who always been burned by someone else with a similar personality. Yeah, human beings are pattern recognition machines. Like, our brains are fundamentally lazy. They don't want to do work if they don't have to. And we all know that first impression is important. And it's for that exact reason. Our brains want to take a guess at somebody, and it's really hard to shake that guess that somebody takes from us. Sometimes it's again going back to how can we help shape their interpretation, their meaning for who I am and what I'm doing. Sometimes it's as easy as making a statement. We're both working on building something together. We both want the best outcome for the customer. We both want the team to succeed. We both finding something that's a common shared goal that you can pull together that helps them see that you're potentially different from somebody else, that you're potentially, not the same as that person they're expecting to be. You're your own unique individual. Just finding that shared common goal, that shared respect to help build that going forward. That then feeds into their information, their meaning, and hopefully changes their emotional reaction to you. So Ed's just saying, isn't it a tenth of a second for someone to form a first impression? It's about that. It really is. It's taking this takes a fraction of a second. This whole process takes a fraction of a second, and our brains are just doing it on loop all the time. We're seeing information, we're ascribing meaning to it, and pulling an emotion from it, and that happens in a fraction of a second. And That's why it's really important that we don't forget about these two steps here, how we can change the information to change the meaning, and how we can change the meaning to change the emotion. So we're coming to the end of the session now. Hopefully you've gone through your previous situation, you've thought about the steps that you would focus on differently given the same circumstance. Again, you thought about an action you could take in order to hopefully help change that situation. If you want to share that with me, there's a link on the Last Anywhere page to my LinkedIn profile. Please connect with me. I'm more than happy to talk to you about a particular circumstance offline if you want to have a phone call or a one-on-one Zoom to talk about these things. Like I said, the goal for this is for you to be better as soon as this meeting ends. So if you need something, please let me know. If there's any questions you want to ask in the last few minutes, please ask them now. I'll just give people 30 seconds to think about a question they want to ask. So Anthony's just said, discerning other people's meaning. This is the heart of this whole process, is how we can work that out. It's hard. It plays into a lot of emotional intelligence. It plays into a lot of empathy and compassion and sympathy and understanding, social perception, social awareness, all of these skills which are not always something which people do naturally. The good news is that these things can be learned. These things can be practiced. It's a skill like any other. And it really is a matter of just trying it, coming up with a hypothesis, putting yourself in other people's shoes. That's the one thing I'll say on putting yourself in other people's shoes is there's a fundamental difference between the two questions. What would I do in your shoes? And what would I do if I was you? Those are two different questions. What would I do if I was you is exactly the same as what you would do if you were you and you are you. If I was you, I would do exactly the same as you. Putting myself in your shoes is saying, what would I do if I was in the same situation as you? These are two different questions, and we've got to be conscious of which one we're asking because they're going to give two fundamentally different answers. If there's a difference between what I would do in your shoes and what I would do if I was you, that probably means you're missing some information in what's going on. Because if you were in exactly the same situation as them, you knew everything that they knew, and you didn't know extra, you would probably do exactly the same as them. So if you're struggling to understand the difference between what you would do in their shoes and what they are doing, chances are you're missing some information or they're missing some information. That is something that's hard to work out, and it comes a lot from asking the questions and trying to think of a theory of what could be the case, and then asking them questions to help work out if that theory is right or not. It doesn't have to be, what does this information mean to you? If you ask that question, they're probably not going to answer it, or they're going to give you that first level. Like we've all heard of the 5 whys. Like this is something which, if you ask somebody, what does this information mean? They're going to give you that most brief top level meaning. They're not going to give you those deeper meanings of what it actually truly means to them. That takes building trust with somebody, or it takes having a guess and then trying to ask questions to find out if that's right. So, for example, in that situation of being a new person to the team and thinking maybe somebody in the previous position had influenced the way they're thinking about you, maybe you could ask other people around, what was the other person like? what did they do? How did they act? What things did they do that the team liked? What things did they do that the team didn't like? And then trying to accentuate those things about yourself that are different to that other person that the team didn't like. So if they didn't like that, that meetings were called on a daily basis and the meetings had absolutely no point, then don't do that, and make sure that it's clear that that's not something you're doing. Just simply saying something like, I want to make sure that everybody's working productively, and so I want to keep the meetings down to the minimum possible. What do you guys think will be the right number of meetings? And just making sure that there's that clear difference between the two. Okay, so we've had a few questions, we've had some comments. Please connect to me on LinkedIn and let me know if there's a particular situation you need help with, if there's anything else you want to keep talking about. We've come to the end now, and yeah, if there's any other questions, just let me know.